social media. So when we do find a pocket where like real community is being created, even if it's virtual community, it's drawing heart in the Lord. That's an important thing. So thanks for doing here.
I mean, I think that's what's so, like, social media, it's so hard not to compare and compete, but
I know,
like the exact opposite of that, but it's really, it's a lot of it. I think it's the rosary and also the people, Mary.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay.
I heard a cool talk the other day about social media and the way that it leads us to comparison, as you just named, and out of that to complacency. And I was thinking about that later, that like complacency and sloth and however else we describe it, but like as we're looking into each other's lives and like seeing the greatest hits, you know, the devil would tell us like, you'll never have it that way. And so stop trying, you know, like give up hope. And just realize that your life is kind of stuck where it is, and you're just not going to have that professional, beautiful life that you see out there. And that's such a trap. And we really slip to that and get locked in. And we just have to be attentive to that, because each of us deals with seeing other people's lives and greatest hits in a different way. And it just struck me as a good way of putting it. Connor Flanagan put it that way, that if we aren't careful, we'll get stuck, and then it becomes an instrument for evil. But if not, if we're attentive to it and we're using it for the good like this, it's not an instrument for evil. It could be an instrument for the good.
I mean, I have had weekends where I'm with my beautiful family and I go on social media and I see one thing and I'm upset because like, I don't know, like another family's out doing something really cool. We very rarely leave our house.
Yeah, right.
It's hard, but like, it bothers me because then I'm like, oh my gosh, why am I upset by that? Like everything that's in front of me is perfect. I don't need to change anything, you know, but like, that's how quick it works.
Yeah.
So
often, we're just like leaving the place we are, as you named there, you know, like when we jump onto social media, we're going somewhere. And the question is like, why? You know, if we're just checking in on people, that's fine. But if like we're feeling in like the present place some sort of dis-ease, and then we want to go somewhere else, if that's why we're opening up the apps, we're going to always lose our peace, because the Lord doesn't have us out there in those lives. He has us like right here. He has you in your home with kids, and that's where you're stuck, and that's where you're blessed, you know, like not to miss that.
But so many of us are in our phones, right? Like they're required. And this is one I can't figure out. Like the social media, it can just it's like you want to connect with people and you want to stay connected, but it can zap. You're exactly right. It's peace. It will zap your peace so fast and you won't even see it coming. And so you lose a lot of control, I think. But I don't know.
That's where we have to become like every person. I was kind of reading through the rules for discernment and Saint Ignatius. Like we all just have to learn how our own how we react to what's going on. And we have to kind of be attentive to consolation and desolation, or peace and dis-ease, or kind of disharmony. And we just have to like be a little bit more attentive to that than we often are. And just notice quickly, like, okay, I'm losing my peace, or I'm becoming agitated. Why? And very often, like, it's as simple as, well, I kicked open my phone and I started scrolling through the feed and I'm now agitated. Like, well, put the phone down quickly and get back to what you were doing before, where the Lord was blessing you. And like, if it's that simple, it's not that easy to implement, but like the movement of the Spirit around peace and around agitation, like that's a very simple thing to listen for, but we kind of have to cultivate that. And that takes a little practice.
But then like our youth, like that's where I'm more concerned. Like I'm, you know, in my late 30s and I know how it affects me. But if you're giving a 15-year-old a phone, like they don't even have the psychology to like handle it, you know? I'm like more worried about them, if anything. So I like kept telling my kids, and like, maybe we start a book club. What do we have to do so you don't get on the phone? But we'll figure that out. So, okay, tell us your book that you wrote about St. Francis de Sales. By the way, I have his image. I was going to try and put it up for you this
Oh,
weekend.
sweet.
But yeah.
Yeah, it was, de Sales is an amazing, so many people today are asking for spiritual directors, you know, and like, I want spiritual direction. De Sales is like maybe the greatest spiritual director of all time. He was an bishop, and in his time as bishop, he also was a shepherd to souls, truly, and like directed so many people, lay people, married people, religious. So he left us some writings that are like really very practical and helpful in the spiritual life and trying to move closer to the Lord and into the life of charity. But they're often kind of hard to get at, you know, the language can be kind of stuck in the age. He wrote in the early 1600s, his main book, Introduction to the Devout Life. So I just took like his meditations. He lists off a set of meditations he says that everybody has to go through before they really decide to commit to heaven or before they really are living the devout life.
Okay.
Hey, little buddy.
It's Jamie. Yeah.
Oh.
Johnny's not up yet. Okay, sorry.
So yeah, the meditations it's 10 topics that he put together in order, and they're just really about helping a person address their place in God's creation, the gift of God's blessings, the reality of sin, the fact that we're going to die, we'll be judged, heaven and hell are real, what are we doing about it? And I just think they're very important topics. So what I did was wrap those 10 topics in language that's a little bit more accessible for us today.
Okay.
Because I realized
I have the book. I have it. It's upstairs. But what's the title? So everybody.
Oh, Lift Up Your Heart. It's called Lift Up Your Heart, a 10-day personal retreat with St. Francis de Sales.
That's right. That's right. And he was really the first to help lay people, right, with spiritual direction? Or first to like write about it?
Yeah, I mean, there were. Yeah, he's kind of known as like one of the first writers to really articulate the fact in a clear manner that every single person is called to holiness, and that it's not just for monks and nuns, but like the average person. He's like, I'm writing for people who are, you know, in the city, who are working in the fields. I'm writing for people who are just living a normal life, who know they need to be holy. And he really like made that normative, where there was before him maybe for certain periods of time some confusion, this idea that, you know, you can't be holy unless you're a consecrated religious monk or nun. It's a different state in life, but he really helped us realize that's meant to be broken open. The grace is available to everybody, every believer.
Yeah. Right. Like, what would you say, Father, are like 2 or 3 things that we can do as lay people to grow in holiness? Like habits, anything? Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah, what a beautiful question. I always come back to quiet prayer, especially Eucharistic adoration if possible, but sometimes that's not possible in a state in life that, you know, where kids are, or things are chaotic, or work doesn't allow it. But we can never overemphasize the importance of even a few minutes of just quieting our hearts and turning to the Lord. Who dwells in the inner room. You know, Christ in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, is like, when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father who sees in secret. I think sometimes when we're busy, we forget, we think like, oh, I can't get to church, I can't get on a retreat, my family, it's just not possible, and we despair. And the Lord's like, no, hold on. There's an inner room to your soul, to your heart, and the Father sees that place. So we really need to cultivate like a willingness to go there, and that happens in like a minute or two of quiet prayer. Literally just turning inward, saying, Lord, I turn to you who dwell in my heart. You've taken up your dwelling here as your temple, and I just adore you. I worship you, Lord, and I give you thanks. And we can do that sort of prayer with 1 minute of time.
But that is beautiful. That's an amazing suggestion. We all have to try that today. Okay, but what do we do then about the thoughts that are like, that's the hardest part. Yeah,
that's a place where St. Francis de Sales gave a lot of practical suggestions on distraction. But one thing we watch out for is like not to become obsessed with the distraction itself. You know, like he says, sometimes we become distracted, and then we're angry that we're distracted, and then we're angry that we're distracted. You know, and it's like, now we've lost grip. There's a certain tranquility, like, Lord, I'm giving you whatever I have here, 3 minutes, an hour, and it's not going to be perfect, but I just offer you the gift, and grant me a peace of mind and heart to focus. And we can just offer our distractions back to him. Like a fly, sometimes you just don't, if you pay attention to the fly, it becomes this like real obsession. If you just let it buzz around, be like, yeah, the stupid fly is buzzing around, but I'm just going to focus on it.
I love that.
Yeah, it just takes a little bit of discipline, but to not become, like, even if the prayer's very distracted and we're very dry as we offer it, we're offering prayer. We're carving out time and offering that, and the Lord sees the gift of our attentiveness, and we're disposed to receive from him, even if it doesn't feel like it's the most perfect prayer we could have.
Yeah. That's so great. Thank you. Because that's where I think I struggle the most. Like, I go into it like, okay, this is going to be quiet. And then I go through my to-do list and everything I need to get done. So that's really helpful. Are you still focusing on the forgiveness?
Yeah, so I just finished my dissertation. It needs to be published, but I wrote on the theology of healing through forgiveness, or like where forgiveness fits into the picture of like the entire person being healed by God's grace. So that'll publish hopefully in the next couple of months here.
Okay.
But I finished the writing and I defended it successfully, and I learned so much. Forgiveness is at the heart of everything, really, for our coming into the Lord's, the fullness.
It really is, right? Also, even just forgiving ourselves, right? Like
Yeah.
with
The sales talks about that as self-love. He's like, we have to love ourselves the way that God loves us. Otherwise, we're in like this divided relationship with ourselves. We hate ourselves and God loves us, and so we're not acting as God does toward us. That's a longer, it doesn't happen, overnight. But
right.
I talked to someone the other day who said that they think, and this was a theologian, they think that forgiveness is the hardest thing in the Christian life. And they said even harder than chastity, whatever your state in life. And we tend to focus on chastity because we have so many struggles with it practically in the world that's filled with everything we have on our phones. But he was saying, like, no, forgiveness is harder than chastity. And this is a person who's done a lot of work in healing. And I was like, you might have something there. It's one of the hardest things we do.
It is really hard. What would you suggest, or how do you handle like a friend or a family member? Maybe let's go family member because they're in your family, but they can be quite disruptive, or like they're struggling, right? Yeah. And like sometimes you're told like that negative energy, you're supposed to stay away from it, but it's your family. Or are you supposed to help them like that? I don't know what you're supposed to do. Like, you keep forgiving them, or at what point do you go, okay, you can't be in my life right now until you deal with this?
Yeah, that's a huge, I was just talking to a couple people about that recently. That's sometimes what you're asking about there actually moves toward the question of reconciliation, and the distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation. Like, forgiving doesn't mean that we enter right back into a relationship exactly as it was before the wound. And in some cases in our families or our friendships, it might be like harmful to get right back into the relationship as it was. We can forgive regardless of the other person, repenting, regardless of whether or not we're in touch with them. We can forgive from the heart, which is to let go. I'll just keep talking. Just to let go of
keep talking, because this is good. I want to know.
So forgiveness of the heart being different from reconciliation. Like sometimes we think that to forgive means I have to get right back in that relationship. And so I'm terrified because that person's really hurt me. And in fact, it might be imprudent or dangerous to be reconciled sometimes, at least initially. The goal is reconciliation, but we can forgive well before that. And we have to forgive before we can reconcile. Reconciliation involves both hearts. It involves a coming back together. Forgiveness is from me. And eventually, hopefully, it issues forth in acts that are visible and tangible that become the material of reconciliation.
Right.
But there is a distinction between them. So in cases of like your question, when someone just keeps hurting us and hurting us and hurting us, we don't forgive them, we'll be stuck in bitterness and resentment and grudges. We can forgive them, but reconciliation might have to be something we consider further down the road when it becomes clear that they're not going to continue just immediately hurting us again, and thus further inflict wounds on us that are eventually our salvation.
Right. Yeah, because that's just the one I struggle with, because it is like it can be, if it's someone in your family, like you're to ultimately like love them and support them, but there does come a point, I think, where it's also becomes more of a detriment to you and your own family,
Yeah. And we don't want to downplay like the small acts of love. Like, we can be very hurt by someone and even very upset with them and not able to like relate well to them. But at a distance, we can still be offering acts of charity for them. Even in the case of really being enraged, we can still pray for them. If it's real prayer, if we're actually asking that God would bless them, that is a breaking open of our heart from the pain into generosity. We can offer our pain, our sacrifices for them. A very high form of forgiveness is offering the actual pain they inflicted upon us back for them, through the Lord for their salvation, which is precisely what he does on the cross, right? Jesus takes the pain inflicted and offers it to the Father for the salvation of those who inflicted it. And so we can do all of that even while it's really painful to deal with the person before us. So prayer and sacrifice, we can't downplay those. Those are real acts of charity. Right. And charity opens the heart to the life of God.
Right. Yeah, and I think we all experience it or have that, that they're what makes family interesting and fun, right? Like if you didn't have them.
Oh man. Family's like the place where we're all kind of just like we live with, we're kind of stripped down, like you can put on layers out there and put in a good front and have like a public persona or somebody at work or with your friends. Your family knows you, and like you're just raw with the family, which means like that's always the place where God is working, like where the stuff we want to hide from the world just like bursts to the surface. It's like, okay, Lord, I see exactly what I need to be about. I'm still a total mess.
I know.
But that's not a despair. Like it can be despairing, but no, it's actually an invitation to see like, Lord, I need you. And I might present a great face to the world and everybody thinks I've got it all together, but I'm a wreck. And that means I need you. And that means I'm not okay without you, God.
Yes, so, right. Like
really
just saying something like that and then, they say something hurtful or not nice, like to just pause, come Holy Spirit, right? Like, and try to keep the open communication
totally.
With God. So another one of like our team members had a question for you, Jill, and she wanted to ask, how do we find this now? If you need time on this one, I understand, but how do you find the joy in suffering? Mm-hmm. Like, let's say you're undergoing something really, really hard. We're really hitting you with these hard questions.
Yeah, it's a big one.
But how do you find the joy in that? I know a lot of people, right? You look to the cross.
Yeah, so like joy and suffering is a complicated expression because we often, when we think of joy, we think of like when we're hanging out with all of our best friends on a perfect day at the park and everything's beautiful. And that like suffering doesn't fit into that picture. And so we say, how could there be joy and suffering? It seems like a contradiction. Joy and suffering is a very mature place, or like a place where the fruit of the life of faith is really coming to maturity in us, in that we've learned that joy is a gift and wonderful in the park with our friends when we're, perfect day type of stuff. But we kind of mature into realizing that like life is about more than just having fun or feeling good. Life is about eternal realities, and it's in the reading this morning that we would, or for Mass today, that we think things eternal or look to what is above, not to what is below. St. Paul says, joy and suffering comes about, especially through a contemplation of the cross, but really like the intellectual recognition that has to get into our kind of practical lives, that as Jesus himself, everything he did, he was redeeming our fallen nature and our experiences. And everything that happened in the Passion of the Cross, like as he walked the way to Calvary, he experienced physical pain, emotional pain, maybe a spiritual type of pain. And all of that was geared toward the salvation of souls. Like nothing is lost there. And so his even the little experiences that aren't recorded biblically, but the fact of his tremendous toil, all of that was ordered toward the project of God to redeem souls and to raise up creation, to draw all souls to himself. So there's a way of our prayer in a time of peace before the war of suffering to really say like, Lord, help me remember and know your own journey to Calvary. Help me turn my attention to the cross when the pain and the suffering enter, be they small or great pains, and help me to realize that you have redeemed and made possibly holy every human experience of suffering, of ailment, of difficulty, even interpersonal angst, and help me bring you into that, Lord. So it's an intellectual awareness that he's been there in all of our degrees of suffering. And while he was there as the incarnate word, he was turning all of that experience towards salvation. And so our own experiences of suffering are potentially open to participating in that same saving reality, which is very hopeful, but in practice very difficult. Like
so hard.
Flesh, I don't think Jesus was having like a blast, like in the flesh, he's experiencing angst and he's You know, even in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's like sweating blood. Like, do I have to do this, Father? Your will be done. So it's just, it's not as pretty. Joy and suffering, it's not always pretty. It's not always easy. It's not always glamorous. And I don't think the passion of Christ himself was glamorous. You know, it was messy. And that's just, we have to pray with that and meditate on that, and then beg for the grace to like turn our hearts to that. And really, one thing I find helpful is holding a crucifix, like a guy's cross. I don't have one within reach. I do. I have these little Benedictine crosses that are just, it's like I'll hold on to it. I'll squeeze it when I'm like really suffering. Keep it in my pocket or my car. I'll kiss it, like to kiss the, really unite my sufferings to the Lord's. And I keep those kind of all over. That's why I was able to just reach over there and grab it. Like I have them all over the place, because it's like if you have access to the physical cross, like a visible cross, it just reminds you of what's beyond our visibility, but like what's also drawn down into creation and possible for us.
Right. That's so good. I like need a minute to process that.
I know. Sorry, that's a lot. I know.
And I will. And if you're okay with this, I screen record it and I put it on YouTube so that they can listen to it again.
Sure. Yeah,
and
that's
I'll
fine.
put up your book too. So I also want to ask, so do you try to sit in stillness or silence every day?
Yeah, I do a holy hour every day of prayer. And holy hour, we throw that word around. Some people don't know what it means. I just try to carve out an entire hour for prayer with the scriptures and mental prayer, usually in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I live in a house of discernment. We've got 6 men living here discerning the priesthood and 3 priests. It's awesome. We have every morning at 6 o'clock in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And if I miss that, you know, if I'm traveling and it's just prayer gets messed up or it doesn't fall where it should, I can feel it. Like once that plays, missing the holy hour, I start to feel like physically even, I'll start to like, I feel dry. And it's really true that prayer is like the water of the soul, and it's where the Lord raises up.
I think that's so important. Like I really, really wish I could spend an hour every day.
But so keep that desire in front of the Lord. Like I know, you know, we talk about the holy hour in the church a lot. And that is an ideal and a good goal for everybody. But it's made easier for those of us who have given our lives to the Lord in consecrated celibacy. There is a real reality that most families, it's just not feasible.
Yeah. Did your mom and dad, did they do that with you?
No, not. Mom always had mental prayer every day. Dad worked like a daily mass. They didn't have a holy hour or as much time as they have now. They both pray more than they used to. Actually, they're growing in the Lord constantly. But I think there's this sanctifying possibility that, like,
no, I'm just curious for us families. So did you know, like, mom and dad are going to do their holy hour, don't bother them?
Mom, yeah, we were homeschooled for about 5 years, and Mom would have time. Actually, this is a huge gift that she did for us, and for all homeschooling families, I recommend this. She made us do, you don't have to be homeschooled either, actually, but she made us do quiet time, she called it, every day. And when we were younger, it was a half an hour, and as we got older, it moved to an hour. It wasn't required that we pray every day, but we had to go to our rooms and close the door. There was no technology allowed. And we had to bring a Bible, look at the saints, and that was all we were allowed to read, all we were allowed to look at. And so as like a young middle schooler, you get bored really fast, and then there's nothing to do except for like open the Bible or read about the saints or write a letter to God. And so she was kind of training us in the discipline of leaving the distraction. Yeah, and anybody can do that. It's, you know, it's not necessarily for prayer, but like a child, we started that in 5th grade. I ended up praying, you know.
I think it's perfect. It's beautiful. I just a couple weeks ago I was asking my kids about prayer, and they thought prayer was a bunch of like said prayers and the rosary. Yeah. I'm like, no, it's not just that. Like, it's also just like sitting in silence and listening to your heart. And so I'm going to do that.
It's a gift, because so I'll warn you, we hated it, you know, for years. Like, come on, quiet time, so boring. But like, you have to create spaces where there's nothing else to do, like where we can't turn to like our phone distractions or whatever else. You have to create a space where you just turn to the Lord because like you end up running out of stuff to do. And all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, this is more important than what I would have done if I had my phone with me.
Yeah.
It pauses or it creates space for creativity, but also reflection and recollection, and then eventually dialogue with God. Like I found my old journals. I have 5th and 6th grade. They're full of like just letters I would write to God because I got bored. I had nothing else to do. I was like, I'll just write a letter to God to use up some time. And they're really beautiful, like really simple, but really beautiful. It's because I had nothing else to do.
Can you imagine if all of us just took an hour every day to be with God, like how the world would totally be transformed?
Yeah. St. Francis, we were talking about before, de Sales, he would say, and he was writing to people in the world, he said, everybody should pray. You probably know this quote. Everybody should pray for half an hour a day. You need to take 30 minutes a day. But he said, when you become busy and you don't have time, that's when you should pray for an hour a day. Like
I love that quote. I love that.
And maybe it's not 30 and 60 minutes. Maybe you start with 10 minutes and then it's 20 minutes when you're busy. But his point is just like, be attentive, you know?
Yes.
When you're busy, the things are really at risk of falling apart.
Yes.
How dare we forget God, but how easily we forget God, you know?
Yes. Oh, this is like, you were such a gift. Thank you
fun.
so much.
Yeah, for sure.
So much. Okay, guys, today we got to try and take some time for silence.